Hi, everyone. Let's tune into Mercury joining Jupiter in Gemini. Mercury is the ruler of Gemini, and both Mercury and Jupiter are trining Pluto. This is happening, you can say, at the very end of May and over the first days of June. So watch as Mercury joins Uranus and then enters Gemini on June 3rd and joins Jupiter the next day. And during this first week of June, they're both going to be squaring Pluto. So we're building up to a very powerful alignment. And let's just look at all the characters here. Mercury is going to give information. Mercury, by its nature, corresponds to the metaphorical or literal new conversations that we're having. How we're getting thoughts in our mind that we've never thought before that adds more context to our understanding of reality. Jupiter's insight. Jupiter's our fundamental understanding and our intuitive grasp of life and the larger journey. Okay? When Jupiter and Mercury comes together, first, it's important to recognize that essentially once a year, Jupiter and Mercury will come together. This might be different if there's like a retrograde process involved, but for the most part, once a year they join. And at that point, Mercury will be passing Jupiter, entering into a new phase. So here's how I would want to frame this. If you think of right now Jupiter as the protagonist, this is a journey. Right? The Jupiter character is on this journey. It's the beginning of the book, and they're about to go on an adventure. It's a Gemini adventure. New perspective, new insights, new experiences. They're expanding their entire vision of this typical day-to-day world that they've known. And they're beginning to cultivate new insights and new pathways of thinking. In the very beginning of this book, in the first chapter, Mercury joins and says, here's a document, come and read this. Right? It's saying, here are some useful and relevant pieces of data, ways of thinking, insight, information that you can internalize and intuitively work with as you continue on. I'm going to pass by and continue on my quick Mercury way, but listen to what I'm offering to you. Listen to these pieces of information. It's kind of like someone comes with their little flute. I don't know the right name for this archetype. And they come to the village before you go on that big journey and speaks in poems and rhymes and, almost like introduces the plot of the story. And that first scene is going to be very essential, right? So what this translates to is, of course, like the messages that are coming in now are really, really heightened. It's happening, in the beginning of Gemini, and they're entering into a new phase. So there's something that's beginning to emerge now. It's unformed, it's subjective, and it speaks to a much more long-term development. Now, what are the nature of these messages? In part, it's going to speak to some of the harder things that we actually haven't been able to get to the bottom of. That's what's really neat about the signature. In this trine to Pluto, and this is the first quarter trine, so basically you put your finger on Pluto, you move through the zodiac, and you get to 120 degrees. This is the first time in this cycle, since separating from Pluto, that these planets are forming a trine. That's the first quarter trine. The nature of a first quarter trine is like this fresh influx of energy and confidence and creative potential and energy to do something with it. It's like the first time where we feel this sense of purpose and motivation and confidence in ourselves to some degree. So relative to Pluto, all of this fresh insight and perspective and vision emerging right now, relative to some of the deeper soul content that perhaps we've been working with, what are these fundamental radical changes that are happening in our life right now that are pushing up against the status quo of what's known and what's familiar? Now, one helpful way to understand this, we understand that when it comes to thinking, that we all tend to offer a pretty consistent or dependable, predictable response of thought. Stimulus happens and we'll tend to respond to it in a pretty predictable way. This is because of the patterning and conditioning. In particular, if there's large trauma, we're going to see anything that resonates with whatever part of our own being is kind of frozen in some sort of past moment. So we're going to continue to offer the same ways of thinking over and over and over again. This signature is basically speaking to neuroplasticity. There's a way of thinking about the harder, confrontational entrapments, challenges, dynamics, stuck places within our own soul the places where we don't feel power, where we don't feel our agency. There's a way to tune into it and grasp it from a new angle, from a new perspective. And this is why I speak to the importance of metaphorically and literally getting out of the car and walking. Having experiences where we're literally approaching the journey, how we move through life in a new way. And this really speaks to the fact that we have agency over our thought. There is the potential here to realize, I can respond to this in a new way. I can offer a new gesture. I can relate to this differently. And I think we have a greater potential to draw upon that because we can perhaps sense that there is something helpful opening up right now. When we know that life is going in a positive direction, when we can trust that there is a fundamentally and ultimately positive evolutionary trajectory here, we become more and more less interested in investing our mind in negative thoughts or unhelpful thoughts. Because we know, oh, there's something helpful and healing unfolding right now. I don't want to distract myself from that. Like, we become more oriented to be positive and thoughtful with our thoughts. Think about it this way. If you're excited about like something you're going to do that day, like a new date or your first day on an exciting job, or you're excited about your first day at school, there's going to be a loftiness. There's going to be an elevated quality to your thinking. You're not going to sweat the small stuff. You're going to want that to kind of just come and go. You're going to be more diligent. And the key here is we don't want our negative mental patterns and reactivities and our deeper unconscious patterns to get in the way of the goodness that's beginning to unfold. And to be really clear, this is not about suppressing any of the deeper shadow content. It's realizing, okay, that's here, and I don't have to engage with it and identify with it right now. I'm going to put that in my pocket for later. I'm going to create a space to, if there's communication in a container, deal with it, communicate about it. If it's something I need to feel and work with, I'll bring that to my practice. But right now, I don't need to let that interfere with the unfolding of life's plan for me and for all of us. Do you get the basics that I'm saying here? When we really understand there's something essentially positive here, we're less likely to want to interfere with that. So that's helpful in terms of developing more of an open-mindedness here, beginning to see things differently. And I just think there's an invitation right now to embrace new perspectives and ways of thinking and engaging with life so that we can actually begin to see things from a completely different angle and thus have new thoughts we haven't had before. It's like entering into a phase of greater objectivity where the same issues can be perceived from a higher level of perception, a little more objective with less preconception. So this is useful, right? We can really just spend a lot of time with being with what's emerging right now. Like the gift of these transits is it makes something very evident. The new direction, the new thoughts, the new pathways, the new ideas, new perspectives are really emphasized right now. So what happens then, this is really fascinating to me. As I mentioned, Mercury will join Jupiter about once a year, unless there's a retrograde issue going on. And let's look at what happens in 1 year from now, literally 1 year from now. Mercury will join Jupiter again. Watch this. At the second to last day of its time in Gemini. So in this book, we have like a very exciting and like energetic introduction to this Jupiter journey, with Mercury coming in the very beginning. And at the very end of the book, just before Jupiter's done with this, Gemini journey, Mercury comes again with his, his poems and rhymes and riddles, and you kind of get it now, right? It's like another dimension of insight and perspective that kind of also begins this next journey, this next phase. I think that's very interesting, and it beautifully sandwiches this whole Jupiter and Gemini journey. There's something else that I want to really give attention to here. We have to appreciate that, right now in particular, let's go to right now, Mercury is going to be joining Uranus. We had a lot of strong Jupiter-Uranus activity. So, of course, before Mercury even joins Jupiter, Mercury is going to also kind of be invigorating this Uranian dimension, which is the ruler of this Pluto in Aquarius. So, again, there's a new direction opening up now. And I can't emphasize enough that the nature of this new direction is it doesn't fit into the boxes. It doesn't. Like anything that's happening right now doesn't fit into the pre-existing context or box that we have of our life. And so if we're trying to control it and like possess it and give it known parameters, we're going to miss out entirely and suffer, because really what's wanting to happen right now emerges from a freed up mind that isn't afraid to look at things, even hard and difficult things, in a new way. So, even before we enter into Gemini, Mercury is giving a lot of insightful information. And you can just sort of think of it as like between Uranus and Jupiter, we have this like potent window of energy, and Mercury will already be trining Pluto. So again, like this week or two is just really charged. But here's what I want to say about Uranus. Uranus is getting ready to move into Gemini, right? It's already trining Pluto. It's an out of sign trine, but it's there. When Uranus enters Gemini, it's going to be in a completely new ecosystem. And it's helpful to appreciate that Mercury is a lower octave of Uranus. So Mercury is like direct, linear, local information, local memory. Uranus is long-term memory, the subconscious memory embedded within our own soul, related to the entire field of our experiences ever, even in prior lifetimes, right? So it's not consciously recalled or identified or classified in a Mercury way. It's just there. And this is what Jungian would term as the individuated unconscious. Okay, so we have these subconscious memories that influence our perceptions, but we're not conscious of that which is embedded within our own soul. This is obviously going to be bringing to light and kind of emerging into conscious awareness a lot of the deeper suppressed content. Jeff Green actually beautifully described Uranus as subliminal. And I love that idea because it's below the surface of conscious awareness. It's subliminal, but we're seeing the signs or the indications of it on the surface. Mercury passing Uranus and then moving into Gemini, just before next year, Uranus makes its first touch into Gemini. It's also sort of a prelude to this greater process of liberation. Like our minds are being blown open. There's a vantage point in a way of thinking of everything that's beyond the framework of what we know. And just so you know, this Uranus-Pluto trine is going to be the highlight of like practically the next decade. I think until 2032, they are going to be in a trine in air signs. So this is from one larger sort of macro microcosmic point of view. What's happening now is also a bit of a foreshadowing into this larger, much more transformational evolutionary process long term. I want to do my best now to offer a perspective on our experiences within time and space that resonates with more of an evolutionary soul understanding. So we tend to think of our experiences in time from a more Saturn condition point of view as like, this is my idea or my story of the past, my anticipations or projections or constructs of the future, and some kind of hazy idea of, and this is where I am right now. From an evolutionary perspective, we can really think of time more in archetypal terms. That whatever is emerging in our life at any moment in time is archetypally resonant with other facets of past experience that are also just re-emerging right now. You can go back hundreds of years and thousands of years and find that through our time experiences, there are these phases where these archetypal dynamics re-emerge, seemingly re-emerging in a new body, in a new context, new faces, new experiences tangibly. But the essence of these experiences, the core dynamics of them, are actually just repetitive. And they're going to re-emerge over and over and over and over again in these different forms, kind of interacting and manifesting seemingly as an external event, but really pointing to this liberation process that's happening inside. Now, like I was saying earlier, we will tend to offer the same response, the same reaction, the same thoughts to that which arises. But as we start to orient more from the inner space, we realize that there is a very intimate relationship between the events of our life and the response that I'm offering to it. We kind of start to capture that there's sort of a matrix here there's some sort of pattern here, and this pattern is inseparable from my own inner reality. We kind of liberate ourselves from these repeated patterns by choosing to meet it from a completely different place. We recreate these patterns, they re-emerge, and they don't always happen in the same way. It's like archetypally, the essence, the flavor, the taste of past experiences will re-emerge, but it doesn't even have to be the same event. It could be someone wearing the same article of clothing from an event that happened. The vision, the sight of something that reminds you on a subconscious level with a greater experience that's occurred. And these relationship patterns or dynamics can emerge in our life, but only in a very subtle way, but just enough to elicit these larger past experiences that we haven't quite been resolved within. When we're not resolved, there's some element of our own agency that we haven't known, that we haven't claimed. So really meeting these experiences from a higher level of intelligence, it breaks the pattern. Like, this is what liberation is. We free ourselves from that cycle, right? And it's like kind of like getting out of a trance. I can know for myself, there's like certain soul patterns that I've been manifesting over and over and over again. And I've been having this really neat experience of beginning to observe something that I've been predominantly unconscious of. And once I begin to become aware of it, through that internal self-awareness, I begin to see the events of my life from a completely different angle, because I was responding in a sort of unconscious trance-like way. But when there's consciousness, these events emerge, and it's like this brilliant moment of, this doesn't have to happen again, right? And I think that's really potentiated with these signatures, and again, sort of speaking to this brilliant, larger process of awakening that's going to be happening over many years with this Uranus-Pluto trine. The amount of insight and clear thinking that we can really cultivate right now is really beautiful and really profound. There's a Victor Hugo quote that says something like, "There's nothing in the world more powerful than an idea whose time has come." And let's just contemplate the beauty. And Victor Hugo himself, he had Mars in Aquarius in the 3rd house, trining Uranus. So that also kind of combines that Uranian and that Gemini energy. So he's a great example of that. To have a new idea, and that being the most powerful thing in the world, says the mind, the space has been created to be able to apprehend the possibility for a new way of thinking. There's nothing more. You can invent all kinds of things or make all kinds of effort to build all kinds of cities and infrastructures and make all kinds of plans, but it's going to be limited by the state of consciousness from which we're doing all of those things. The littlest effort that emerges from a new state of consciousness is far more powerful than building universes from the old state of consciousness, because it's just the same old, and it's going to relate to the same archetypal dynamics in the same predictable ways. So I think we can appreciate, we don't even know what we haven't yet thought of. We know that with this whole air trine and just the immense amount of air energy, especially with Pluto and Aquarius, we see things like AI and whatever, but don't focus so much on just the abstract technological developments. What we want to really give attention to is what's being liberated in the mind. What new pathways of thought and perception of reality are we actually awakening to? And this is something for each one of us. Any one of us can have a moment of thinking differently. And in that different thought, a whole new world, a whole new paradigm of possibilities opens up from that one single new thought. I mean, that's how all of these things come about anyway. Someone has a thought and explores it, moves with it. And I think it's important that we don't get stuck on the sort of disempowered, there's so many technological like the real evolution of humanity is not just in like AI or all these things that are happening. It's in the liberation of our own minds, and we're the ones doing this. But we can see, and just like many of the infrastructures that we are a part of, we don't realize that there are different ways of doing it. And we forget, right? We forget that in the past 10, 15 years, social media has become the reality that we all swim in. But even social media, it's entirely commercial. They're selling your data. They're trying to use your information for their own profit. There's an algorithm that you have to learn how to master in order to, advertise well. That's a paradigm. Are there other ways of thinking where we can communicate ideas, promote business, share with each other, that's rooted more in the energy of trust, that's rooted more in the energy of people being drawn towards quality versus needing to master an algorithm in order to be seen? And there are different organizations that are working on that right now. And that's just like one example in my limited knowledge of this stuff, of things that are beginning to emerge. So let's take this time as an opportunity to trust our capacity for greater spaciousness and objectivity of thought. For those who would like to work with me in service to your soul growth, you can fill out a form through the link in the description below. I offer one-on-one sessions, relationship readings, and more long-term soul-to-soul companionship sessions. I also have many classes, class series, and self-study courses available for those who would like to delve into astrology from a heart and soul perspective. Lastly, every Monday at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific, I offer a live stream class for free for anyone who wishes to attend. Currently, I am teaching Neptune Aspects, and I recently completed a series on Pluto aspects. As always, thank you for watching.